Hello friends, I am very excited that we are here in Acts chapter 9. So Acts chapter 9, I will say, is mostly about the conversion of Saul. So this is a pretty big main event of the book of Acts, because that's basically the reason I started. I went to this book because I wanted to talk about who Saul was before we went on to Romans, because he's the writer of Romans and most of the New Testament. So, but at the time here, we mentioned a few chapters ago the stoning of Stephen. Stephen was the first Christian martyr, and it said in that chapter that they all put their garments at the feet of Saul. And one commentator mentioned that he said it almost certainly meant that he was kind of in charge of this persecution. So he's going around like crazy, persecuting Christians left and right. And he finds out that there's a bunch of Hellenist believers, or Hellenist Jews, that are starting churches up in Damascus. Now, Damascus was part of Syria, and still is actually. Back then it was the capital, and it was a great city then. It's still a pretty amazing city now. And so it's north, about 6 days journey north of Israel. So he gets letters from the synagogues there in Damascus, giving him permission to get rid of anybody who's spreading Christianity there in Damascus. And after he does that, he gets the letters and he goes down there. The trap is set. And later we'll see that he's going to get snared in his own trap. So he heads over there, and on the road there, he's there. This is something that I've glazed over. I never really realized this, but he had people that were going with him. I should have known, if he's going to be persecuting a bunch of Christians there, he's going to need an entourage. He's going to need people to carry out the dirty work. So sure enough, there's people with him, and a bright light comes out and blinds him. And he hears a voice saying, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" The interesting thing is that later on in this book we find out, I always pictured this happening at night. Like they're just kind of walking into Damascus after a long day's journey, and the sun's already gone down, and because it's nighttime, a bright light comes. But you find out later on in the book of Acts that it was around noon. It was in the middle of the day, and it says that a light that was lighter than the sun came and blinded him. And then he heard the voice, and it freaked out the people that were with him. It wasn't just a voice that he heard in his head. He said the people around him heard the voice also, and it scared them. And so he's hearing the voice of God, and he's saying, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I'm Jesus, who you're persecuting." So he goes into Damascus, and he stays there for a couple of days. And there's a guy in Damascus named Ananias. And there, Ananias is talked to by God about what he's like, there's this guy named Saul, and you need to go and talk to him. And this conversation is really interesting, because he tells Ananias, he's my chosen instrument. And Ananias is talking back to God. He's like, I heard about this guy. He's the one we were running from. He's the reason we came to Damascus. And he says, well, he is my chosen instrument. And I think it's interesting what he says here. He said, I need you to go there because he has had a vision where you came and you opened up his eyes. And he says, I need to show him something. He says it right away, but I think it's interesting that he didn't say, I need to show him how much I love him, which is true. When you read the epistles of Paul, you will find out that, there are very few people that had a relationship like this with God. But he didn't say that. He didn't say, I need to show him about the wonderful salvation that he can have in me, which is also true. There's so many things that God could have said to Ananias here about Saul, but he said, I need you to open his eyes because I need to show him how much he needs to suffer for my name's sake. Not all the wonderful things. I need to show him how much he's going to suffer. You need to open his eyes. And he said, because he's my chosen instrument, and he's going to go before Gentiles and kings and to the sons of Israel. So Ananias, probably a little freaked out, goes to the guy that he's been running for his life. And he puts his eyes, and it says that like little scales came off of his eyes, and then he could see. And the ESV Study Bible says that it's something that really happened, but it was meant to be a symbol of how he couldn't see it before, but the Holy Spirit is showing him, he can now see, like John Newton says, I once was blind, but now I see. Anyway, so immediately after that, he goes into the synagogues, the one that he got the letters from, the one that he kind of set the trap in. The trap was anybody who's speaking, preaching Jesus, they are to be arrested. This was his trap. And he goes in there, and now he's preaching about Jesus, and everybody's looking around like, this is the guy we were running from. Why is he preaching about Jesus? This doesn't make any sense. But, that's what happens. And after that, he kind of didn't get snared by his own trap, but he almost did. It said that he had to escape from Damascus, and they had to hide him in a basket. The Christians he was persecuting hid him in a basket and then put him over one of the city walls so that he wouldn't get snared by his own trap. So, anyways, if it wasn't so glorious, it would be hilarious. So that's what happens. After that, he goes back to Jerusalem, and he wants to talk to Peter and the apostles, and I can imagine why they wouldn't want to do it, but they didn't really want to talk to him. So they kind of keep him away, but Barnabas, good old Barnabas, from the previous chapters, he really seems like an amazing guy. I wish I could have met Barnabas. But Barnabas starts talking to Saul. I keep calling him Paul, but he changes his name later on in this book. We all know him as Paul, but right now his name is Saul. And he talks to Saul, and he's getting the story, and he comes back to Peter, and he tells him everything that he's been doing. And so they bring him to Caesarea. And from Caesarea, I get the impression that they still didn't trust him completely. But they're like, if he's preaching Jesus, let him preach Jesus. So they sent him to Tarsus, which is where Paul is from. Paul was a very educated man. He studied under Gamaliel, who was a very big name. And, he was kind of an everything man. He was a Pharisee. He was a a studied man, so he was a Hellenist, which means he spoke Greek. He was more educated, and he was a Roman citizen. So all these things put together, he was kind of a very, very respected. He was from a very respected position, and so they sent him back to where he was from, saying, tell him to preach at his home, in his hometown. So the rest of the chapter, it has a couple of miracles by Peter, and basically he is starting to preach also to the Gentiles. He's starting to get into Gentile territory, and so they're setting you up for what's happening in the next chapter. So that's what we have to look for tomorrow. All right, have a great day. Bye.